Hey everyone, welcome back to the Krusty Krab, where we are covering every single Material UI component. And if you find value, make sure you hit that subscribe and that notifications bell. But today we are covering the tooltip component. Now, if you're wondering what a tooltip is, essentially, if you have some sort of DOM element like an icon or text or anything, and you hover over it and you see this little text at the bottom, this is what is known as a tooltip in Material UI. You can see that all it takes in the most basic form is a title prop, and that title prop will essentially just show whatever you want to at the bottom by default when you wrap it around whatever element it is that you want to show a tooltip. So the next most popular prop you can pass in here is obviously the positional prop. So depending on where you actually want it to start, there are actually, looks like 12 different positions here. So for example, you could have it at the top, and every direction has either start, the direction itself, and then end. So you can see whenever you have start, it'll sort of make it to the start of whatever direction you're going in. So if we're going horizontally, it'll be the start of that. If we don't pass anything in, it'll be right in the middle of the element. And then if we pass an end, it'll be at the end. When you're dealing with something that is vertical, you'll see here that it can start on the top right, then go into the middle, and then go to the bottom right instead if you're on the right side. And same for left, and same for bottom start. So to change that up, all you really have to do is pass in the placement prop, and then just pass it in with whatever direction. By default, it is bottom, so it'll be right at the bottom in the middle of your element. So if that's where you want it, which is the most common where I see it anyways, feel free to keep that in there. Then, of course, they will have some examples showing you how you can modify these stylings. Now, the way they do it in their examples is always with the styled component, which we will talk about in our styled component video. But essentially, all they're doing here is they are taking the base component and wrapping it with all of these styles here, which is a lot. As you can see, they always try to make it look really cool whenever they are adding their own styles to it in the documentation. But you can also pass in the SX prop, and I'll have a video in the description explaining everything about the SX prop. But essentially, it is just a way to add stylings to the actual component itself without needing to do anything too complex or anything big and scary looking like styled components and stuff like that. That is new to Material UI V5 that they added. Now they also want to display here that you can pass in anything to actually be a child component for a tooltip. It doesn't have to be a Material UI component. And the other cool thing is you can control what actually triggers the tooltip. So for example, you can disable specific listeners if you wanted to make it so that only other listeners, for example, will actually go ahead and trigger it. So for example, for the click one, you can see that they disabled the focus, the hover, and the touch listener, and the only one that hasn't been disabled is the click listener. So that's pretty cool that you can go and be able to do that. And if we look at the API documentation, we'll get a list of all the different ones that you can actually disable. So over here, you can see you can disable the focus listener. So for whatever reason it becomes focused, hovered whenever they interact or whenever they touch it. So that's good for like mobile and stuff like that as well. So let's look at some of the other props that they have here. So the other thing they have here is sort of like a you can have tooltip be a controlled input. And if you're not familiar with controlled inputs, essentially what it allows you to do is allows you to keep the state of whether or not that tooltip is being shown. So in this case, you are able to pass in the state variable itself. So in this case, they called it open, and this is just a regular React state variable. But it sort of works differently than other inputs. So the on close will be triggered whenever the user, leaves the vicinity of the hover, and the on open will happen whenever they go on it. And in this case, all they're doing is setting it open and close. This you probably will only need to do if you have some really next level custom interactions. This is one of the only Material UI input and I don't even know if I would call it an input, but Material UI components where I wouldn't recommend controlling it unless you really need some sort of custom interaction where, for example, if they hover over it, something stays for a while until something else gets hovered over. Then in that case, it sort of makes sense. But if that's the case, you're probably not using a tooltip anyways. You'd probably be showing something else, because if I hover over this and this stays at the bottom and then I go and do other stuff and it's still at the bottom, sort of feels weird from a UX perspective. I personally can't think of a case where you would want that, but just know that it is possible if that is something you would want. So of course you can also do things like set the actual width. the interesting part here is that they use the styled components once again to set the width, but you also could just pass in the SX prop and set a custom width to all of these as well. So just the same way they're passing in margin into this button, you could go ahead and pass in SX equals bracket width colon 500 px if you wanted to do something like that. The other thing is you can disable interaction. So if we go to any other tooltips, you can see here when I hover down to it, I can like click and copy and paste the tooltip. You can even embed things like buttons inside of the tooltip if you wanted to. You can pretty much do a whole bunch of other cool stuff, I believe, with the tooltip as well. But over here, if you pass in the non-disable interactive prop, you actually can't go and interact with this. And I could try as hard as I can to, as quickly as I can, move my mouse down, but it actually isn't letting me pretty much get to it. So then they also have different transitions. So for example, you can see the regular one is just what they call the grow animation, which is sort of just like comes out of nowhere and sort of like grows to that size. Fade will have it fade in and out, and zoom will have it sort of zoom in and out from the top part of it. And of course, you could just pass in the transition component. It's sort of weird because this prop starts with an uppercase. I've never seen any Material UI prop start with an uppercase before, but just know that that's a thing. So that might be a mistake on their end, or maybe it's some convention that I haven't seen before. But that's the only Material UI prop that I've seen start with a capital letter. The other cool thing is if you wanted to, you can make it so that it follows the cursor by passing in the follow cursor prop. And this is pretty weird. Probably use out there for someone. Yeah. And that is pretty much, you can also add a delay for how the enter and the leaving. Of course, these are more complex things that I think the majority of you guys that are using tooltips are probably not going to be able to have use cases, are probably not going to have use cases that allow you to do all those different things. But the one thing I did want to go ahead and highlight that might be useful for some of you guys is you see here for the title, we've classically just been passing in text, but that title prop is actually a node, which means you can put anything you want in there. And that's what I was saying when I said you could put a button, you could put emojis, you could put an entire table in there if you really wanted to. You could put any, React JSX node inside of the tooltip to customize it however you want. It doesn't just have to be text. For me, I found use cases where I have used that. Everything else that they have here is pretty cool, just from the sense of functionality wise, but I don't think a lot of you guys will be getting much use out of them unless you have very specific use cases. But that is one thing that I think is really good to know, that you can pass in any JSX node into your title prop to really customize it however you want. And that's pretty much going to be it. It was a really simple component. And if you found value, make sure you leave a comment. It helps a lot with the algorithm. Let me know what you want me to do next. And also hit that subscribe and notifications bell if you want to learn more about React and Material UI, as well as join our Discord community where we are a pretty much React focused group. And I'll see you guys in the next video.